Basically, at its core, crop steering is where producers and farmers control the environment that plants are grown in to be able to adjust the chemical profile of the plants to get some desired outcome. Now, that's a very generic answer, covers a wide swath of things, but uh, predominantly in agriculture that's grown indoors, the producers are under a lot of pressure to maximize the value of their products. So much like, say, the craft beer industry, the fine wine industry, consumers will pay a higher price for higher quality product, and they want that consistently. So, for more specific, I guess, to what we're talking about here at the show, the cannabis is as cannabis becomes legalized, it becomes more socially acceptable. Consumers are starting to develop brand loyalty. So much like there's Coke and Pepsi people, there's going to be brand XYZ versus brand ABC consumers. And they expect that product to be consistent batch after batch every time they go to the dispensary. Because if they get something they really like, the next time they go to the dispensary, they get something they don't like, that producer is going to lose brand loyalty. At the same time, margins are very tight in this industry. Producers have to make money. Very, very small changes in the quality of cannabis can make a very big difference in the price. So we did a survey, for example, at the Ontario Cannabis Store, and a 1% change in the quality translated to a 7% increase in the price. So producers have a lot of pressure to make sure that those crops are grown to the highest quality they possibly can so they can command that high price. Now, the way that they're utilizing crop steering is that they have a whole variety of things they control in the greenhouse or in the grow room, and they need to adjust the environments in the greenhouse and grow room to make sure that when those plants grow, that they can make the adjustments to guarantee that those plants are grown with the quality they expect. That's really what crop steering is for cannabis producers. There's a myriad of technologies that producers use today. Um, Indoor growing has become very, very sophisticated. They, for example, monitor a lot of conditions in the greenhouse or in the grow room. They monitor the air, like their CO2, humidity, temperature, the whole myriad of things that they measure as the crop is growing. There's also a whole myriad of technologies that they use to control the crop. So they control the nutrients going into the plants, they control the lights, they control the light cycle, the wavelengths. These are all things they have under their control. And not only are these things that they can measure and they can control, but they're all normally networked back to a central location so that they're in real time making adjustments to the environment, um, and then measuring that same environment to make sure that the environment is following whatever the SOP that they've established for that particular product or that particular crop is. These systems are very sophisticated. So producers are putting a lot of money into these technologies that they're using right now, um, to integrate the tools that they need to properly steer the crops. For example, one of our partners, a company called Greenlight, you've probably heard of them. Greenlight not only helps them measure the environment, but it also helps them measure the soil, so that it makes sure that what they're changing in the environment gets into the soil or the grow media. So now the roots of the plants have access to whatever it is that they're using up here to help influence the plants. They have a lot of things that they can monitor. They have a lot of things they can control. But the problem is that they can't measure the plants as they're growing in real time. So producers don't know if the plants are actually responding to these changes in the environment. So think about your investment portfolio. So if you couldn't look at your accounts for a year and you were making investments in companies, but you didn't know how those investments did until it was the end of the year and you were doing your taxes, you had no idea if you've been successful or not. Producers have a similar problem in that they put the crop in the ground, they invest a lot of money into growing what is a very high value crop. They make all these changes to the environment. They measure the environment to make sure the changes are happening, but they don't know until harvest, and they send samples to an outside lab if the plants have actually responded the way that they're expecting to that environment. So the biggest challenge they have today really is that it's almost plant and pray, where they They put the plants in, they control things as best of their ability, but they don't know if the plants actually responded. With all these technologies I mentioned earlier, they measure a lot of things, they control a lot of things, they have a lot of knobs they can turn to influence the plants, but without actually measuring the plants themselves, they really don't know which way to turn the knobs. And if they do turn the knobs, they don't know if the plants responded. Most crops that are grown indoors are very short crops. So, for example, leafy greens can be grown within a matter of a couple of weeks. So what we're talking about here, cannabis crops typically can be grown in the flowering stage from 8 to 10 weeks. The most interesting part of a cannabis crop as it flowers is probably the last 4 to 5 weeks. So there's a lot of changes that take place to the plant very quickly. Um, Small changes to the fertilizers, small changes particularly to the micronutrients can have a tremendous influence on how the terpenes, for example, evolve in those last 4 to 5 weeks, how the cannabinoids and perhaps the minor cannabinoids can evolve in those last 4 weeks. That takes place over a very short period of time. So if they were to send samples to a lab to take a check and see how the plants are doing, by the time they get the results back, the plants have moved on to the next stage of production of whatever it is that they're trying to emphasize for that crop. In addition, um, cannabis tends to grow up to a peak, but then it can actually degrade if it's left in the grow room too long. THC levels can drop off, terpene levels can drop off. So it's very important for producers to know exactly when it is to harvest those crops. So the only way they can do that is if they can measure in real time, because that little window to harvest might be days long. In some cases, it might even be hours long. Not only what day, but what time of the day do they have to harvest. So because those changes happen in such a short period of time, it's very important that they're continuously in real time measuring the plants themselves and asking them how they're doing. Sure, they could send samples to a lab. But as I mentioned earlier, labs are too slow to get results back in time. Now, growers could build their own labs. However, to build an analytical chemistry lab is very expensive. It takes a lot of specialized skills, a lot of specialized equipment. It's really too cost prohibitive, too labor intensive, prohibitive for most producers to implement their own lab. Even if they do build their own lab, sometimes the results come back even hours to even a day, even from a typical analytical lab. So it's very important for producers to have access to technologies that give them very accurate results on how the plants are doing, but doing it in real time and doing it accurately. And being easy enough to use that they don't have to go out and hire PhD scientists to operate them. So for example, in our case, we developed the HarvestIQ, which is based on the same technology that they've used in the laboratories, but we built some technology around it that makes it a lot easier to use than a typical lab instrument and utilizes things like AI and machine learning to make the results easy to understand, that you don't need specialized skills to operate them. It's more and more important that producers have access to these sorts of technologies for the whole spectrum of growing indoors. For example, all these systems, as I mentioned earlier, all these systems are all connected together. So they're not controlling different things independently. They're all being controlled together. It's important that they have access to technologies that also feed back to the control system to make sure those knobs that I mentioned earlier are turned the right way. So, for example, with the HarvestIQ, it can operate as a node in a network. So through our partners like Cronetics, we implement this as another device on the network so that the conditions are changed when they're trying to steer the crop. The plants are measured. Those results are immediately fed back into the overall control system for a facility. Really, no, it's not going to replace lab testing. In a lot of jurisdictions, lab testing is post-harvest lab testing is required by law. Almost every jurisdiction requires a cannabis producer send a representative sample to a certified lab to make sure the product is safe and also to give them the information that goes on the label. That's probably not going to go away. We're not positioning the HarvestIQ as a regulatory tool. This is a tool to help the producers steer their crops in the right direction so they can grow that high revenue, high quality product. We're not trying to provide them with a regulatory tool that they use to meet the requirements for the government testing. Part of it is that once the government mandates something, it's really hard for it to go away. But also, but also a lot of jurisdictions do require this lab testing at the end of harvest regardless.